in 2020 as COVID-19 pandemic joins conflict, climate change and economic troubles in pushing up levels of hunger around the world. This is according to a new report released by the United Nations World Food Programme. The cost of a plate of food 2020 report is released as the World Food Programme estimates that the lives and livelihoods of up to 270 million people in Africa will be under severe threat in 2020 unless immediate action is taken to tackle the pandemic. All right, to discuss this further, we're now joined by Gerald Bourke from the World Food Programme. Gerald, a warm welcome to SABC News, sir, and thank you so very much for taking time to speak to us this afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Well, let's discuss this, the WFP report and what it found regarding access to food in the midst of this global pandemic. I would, of course, imagine, for instance, that those traveling to perhaps help those in need and provide food would have now been prevented to do so. So I imagine that's just one of the issues associated with the problems that WFP might have found. But please take us through this report further.
Sure. As you mentioned, essentially the report just confirms that millions of people, especially in Africa, cannot afford a basic meal, say, of rice and beans. Yeah. And it illustrates where the extent of that limited affordability, and it notes that food is costliest relative to daily earnings in South Sudan. 17 African countries, unfortunately, are in the list of the 20 costliest countries. And in fact, 5 southern African countries are in the top 10 of the costliest countries. So Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, DRC, and the Republic of Congo. So it really hits home on this continent.
You know, what bothers me quite a lot, and I'm obviously talking about the South African context in particular, as I haven't seen what the situation is in other parts of country. What I do understand is that in South Africa, we are producing enough food. So there is, in fact, enough food to go around, which would then make me wonder why food prices would then be so high if there is enough supply of it. You know, we're not fighting for a little bit of food. There is enough food being actually produced. So I wonder, why is it that you know, the cost of food is really so high to the point where so many of our people can't actually put food on the table?
That's certainly true for South Africa. It's a surplus producer of food. You know, not the case with most other countries on the continent. And the factors contributing to the high cost of food relative to earnings are the same as those contributing to hunger or more widely. You know, conflict, for example, drives many people from their homes, means they can't grow food, yeah. Means they can't, they lose their livelihoods, they haven't got a job. Climate change is another factor, and of course farmers in this part of the world are very familiar with the consequences of that. Persistent drought, for example, one normal rainy season in South Africa, in southern Africa, in the last 5 years. So drastically reducing yields, pushing up prices. Economic turmoil is another factor. You know, many governments in this region are burdened by heavy debts, fiscal deficits, meaning that they have limited resources to devote to social protection schemes, safety nets that can support the most vulnerable. And as you mentioned, all this is now compounded by COVID-19, which has sent joblessness surging, particularly in urban areas. So it's quite a cocktail that makes food much more expensive and aggravates hunger.
Yeah, I wonder if this is an issue that's also forming part of this report by the WFP, and that's the issue of food waste. This is a very big issue. If you look at many parts of Africa where people who are able to get food kind of waste that food in any case, and I wonder how much that adds to the problems that we're discussing in terms of people not being able to access food.
Indeed, it's a huge problem. As you mentioned, South Africa is a surplus producer. In fact, the world produces more than enough food to feed the 7 billion people on the planet. But the unfortunate fact is that about 1/3 of the food that is produced in a given year for human consumption is either lost or wasted. The waste mostly happens in the richer, more prosperous countries. Not least at the kitchen table, left uneaten and then thrown out. The losses mostly occur in the developing world, post-harvest, oftentimes because of poor storage. But it's an absolute tragedy, the amount that is wasted and lost, and it's incumbent upon all of us to assume the responsibility to limit that.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about that responsibility that we all have, what then needs to be done? I mean, we have these discussions and reports and so forth, but then what needs to be done for the issue of hunger to really meaningfully be addressed? And you're quite correct. It is something that we all have a responsibility to tackle, but I mean, how, when, what do we do?
Well, right now, the main contributing factor to hunger globally, as I mentioned, is conflict. So we need peace in war zones. We need those who can influence warlords, warring factions, the leaders of those factions, to exert that influence to restore peace to those places. It's a big ask, of course, but it's absolutely vital. 8 of the 10 biggest food crises that WFP is currently dealing with are in war zones. Yemen, Syria, South Sudan, northeastern Nigeria, closer to home, DRC, and northern Mozambique. So that's the first thing, peace. And secondly, climate change being a big contributor, there needs to be much more investment in adaptation and in mitigation. The World Food Programme invests quite a lot in adaptation efforts in this part of the world, essentially trying to render vulnerable communities less subject to the shocks, the flooding, the drought, that extreme weather conditions inflict.
All right, Gerald Bourke, a great pleasure having you here on the show with us. Thank you very much for giving us your time this afternoon. Gerald Bourke from the World Food Programme. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, well, October is Transport Month, and Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula is hosting a webinar to